if you've got a completely nutty evaluation, then you're just going to have so little credibility that they just don't think you're going to be serious enough business person to actually carry off the venture that you want the money for. The best way to deal with somebody who says, listen, I am quite interested, but I can see that I'm not getting very much for my money, then you're in the right zone in terms of talking to somebody, going, okay, well, tell me more about it, tell me more about what you'd need, tell me about why you'd need that. So I think that's the important thing is that you can enter into a dialogue where ultimately you're just haggling about the price. I heard somewhere that in the Harvard Business School there are 129 different ways of valuing a business. So I wouldn't. There'd be an amazing number of sort of fantastic models that I'm just not familiar with, but I just use a very approximate rule of thumb. There are two bits of value to come out of a business around about 3 years from the time it started up, which is about the time frame that an angel investor is going to be looking at, and that's how much money you've dispersed as dividends. So that, and the second is how much you can sell the business for around about that time. So I would say it would be again a very rough rule of thumb that you could sell a business for about 5 times its profit. So let's just say a business makes £200,000 profit a year. By the end of year 3, because clearly it's had a sort of ramp up, that means that you might expect to sell that for 5 times that, which is £1 million. So you add to that the amount of money you paid out in dividends, for the sake of argument, £200,000, or you expect to pay out in dividends by the end of year 3, £200,000. That means the overall business, the overall proposition is worth £1.2 million. But of course, you keep part of that yourself as the entrepreneur, and you give part of that to the investor. So of the 1.2 million, let's say the investor gets 50%, that means the investor's stake is worth £600,000. So that's what it's worth at exit. The next part of the jigsaw really is how much return you want to give the investor on their money. Now, I personally think that a way that you motivate an angel investor is to give them a realistic opportunity to earn somewhere between 5 and 10 times their initial stake. So if somebody puts in £10,000, you give them a realistic opportunity to earn £100,000 through dividends and the sale of the business 3 years on. In this example, we said £600,000. So if you're giving them a realistic opportunity of earning 10 times their money, it means that you're after £60,000. Now, there's a whole load of sort of questions to be asked about, whether you should be giving them 10% of your business or 50% of your business. But in this example, if you're giving them away 50% of your business, and you're giving them an opportunity to earn 10 times their money in 3 years, which is 600,000, it follows that you're after £60,000. In other words, to cut that back, you're after £60,000 for 50% of the business, which means to say that your 50% of the business is worth £60,000, which I say pre-money. That may feel like a sort of slightly backwards way of doing it, because actually what you want to do is you're saying, I want to raise an absolute sum of money. So for example, if you want to raise £120,000, then you'd need to give the investor a realistic opportunity, I think, of earning about 1.2 million. And if that's 50%, then you've got to show that the exit value of the business is going to be about 2.4 million. Of course, there's another way of sort of valuing anything, which is called the invisible hand theory of price, which is basically there are sort of two hands that are sort of shaking hands on a deal, and essentially it's about how much somebody's willing to let something go for versus how much somebody's willing to pay for. eBay is a sort of perfect example of how you find the price for any particular sort of object. I think a lot of people are very afraid to give away too much of their business. I think they're probably sort of too hung up on reading things like Richard Branson's autobiography and saying, well, he ended up being worth several billion and he ended up keeping his business, etc., etc. But my belief is life's too short, actually. And if you're going to spend any more than 6 months or a year trying to raise money, and you get a chance that you may not even succeed, forget it. What you want to do is you want to get there, you want to do a really good deal that gives you enough of the piece of the action that you feel like you're getting up every morning running your business, and you give away enough of the action to motivate investors to actually want to give you money. And they've, it's not that easy, therefore you really need to motivate them. And I think a lot of people also get hung up about the idea that they lose control of the business if they have less than 50% of the business. There's another part of the negotiation, which is what the mem and arts are, and how and under what circumstances, and also the shareholder agreement, under what circumstances who decides what. And actually, if, for example, you have an investor who you want to put an awful lot of money in something which is kind of a high-risk venture, and the investor is going to end up with, I don't know, 65, 70% of the business, you can say, okay, I'll give you that percentage, but I want control over these core things, and then there's a negotiation about that. And the other thing, of course, is the investor may want a really good return and want to sort of de-risk some of his investment. And one way to do that is to say, okay, well, I'll give you 70%, but what I'd like is, over time, I'd like to earn back a chunk of that. So I may end up wanting 70% myself, and that means I've got to earn back 40% back off you. And we'll set targets, and if I achieve them, then you're delighted because you're getting your money back over time, and you're going to end up 30% of a really, really successful business. And if I don't achieve them, but I get sort of halfway there, then we find a nice balance. It's often the case that you may want to raise a bit of money to really get things going. And then you, for example, you've got a deadline to hit, and you've got various things you've got to buy in order to hit that deadline. For example, with the 360 Entertainment, we had a show which had to start. The first night was in Kensington Gardens on the 26th of May, and we had a £1 million tent to buy and all the seating, and we had various deadlines by which we had to put down deposits, etc. And the only way we were going to do that was to raise some of the funds before to raise and spend some of the funds before we'd raise all the funds. Now, the classic way you do that is you divide up your investment into seed funds and to main funds or follow-on funds. Now, sometimes that happens that you just raise all your seed funds and you go away for a year and use those seed funds, and then you then do follow-up investment and you give your seed funds as the opportunity to be first in with the main investment. Sometimes you're in a rush, and actually you need to do them simultaneously. And what you say to somebody is, look, you get a higher percentage of my business, or you buy shares more cheaply if you're willing to put money into seed funds. That means that we may actually end up spending the money but never raising enough money to start the business. So there's an increased risk, but against which I'm going to give you more of the business for every pound that you spend. So that's one way that you can differentiate how you approach investors with different deals. But it gets difficult when you're trying to give lots of different investors who are basically, let's say, seed investors or main investors. You want to give them different deals. And there's two reasons for that. First is that it's likely that that will become transparent at some stage and you're going to end up alienating investors. And the second thing is that there's this thing called EIS, which is a fantastic tax relief scheme for startup investments. Now, in order to make your investment EIS qualifying, you're not to give any class of investors an advantage. And that means you need to keep them all straight and clear, that they're all invest on the same terms in any given round. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to value the business that I'm raising money for slightly optimistically, and then be willing to enter into a bun fight basically at a point where an investor goes, yeah, I'm interested, but I'd like a few more percent. Now, some investors will just say, yes, fine, I'll give you what you want for the percentage, and others will tussle really hard. And what will end up probably happening is that you'll end up agreeing with the one investor who really is going to push really hard for a deal, knowing that you've got to go back to all the other investors who you've raised money from and say, actually, there's some good news that you invested at, let's say, 40%, and I'm actually raising that to 50%. So you just know that you can slip all those that you got a better deal from to the point where you tie them all up. And, I said, the largest individual investment I raised money for was 58 separate investors. And we needed to continue to take a judgment as to whether one investor was sufficiently large that they had the possibility of swinging, let's say, 10, 15 other investors who were there before them. But I would say ultimately it's a bad idea to try and do different deals with different investors if it's in the same investment round.